We've got to start with the chip stocks under quite a bit of pressure, including Nvidia down just about 3% last time we checked. How do you see that impacting the markets overall, specifically the NASDAQ?
Well, right now we're going through a huge rotation, right? Smalls are running fast, value is running, and you're seeing a little bit of waver in the growth. For me, it's a bend not break trade. I see this as a breather after a massive run up. Plus, you had Trump's comments on Taiwan that kind of spooked the markets. Could there be more tariffs coming? So for me, I see this as a breather. You could face some near-term tactical headwinds in chip stocks, absolutely. But again, I don't think the trend is broken. So if you have large gains and you're in a taxable account, you need to be thinking, do I really want to dump my Nvidia? Do I really think Nvidia is dead? For me, no. Pullback, consolidation, under pressure, looking near term, small in value, running, chip stocks kind of lagging behind. But I don't want to sell them necessarily because I still think we're in middle innings of the AI play.
Chip stock investors had front row seats to a market plunge yesterday as share prices crumbled across the semiconductor sector, leaving many portfolios awash in red. But why did that happen? Well, it's all thanks to geopolitics, as well as some comments that the 45th U.S. President Donald Trump made, which served as a huge warning to Nvidia stock investors and to investors in other chip companies. So, why did Trump's comments cause this reaction from the market? And what should Nvidia investors do with their shares now? Let's find out in today's video. But first, if you want to keep up with Nvidia latest updates and keep up with the stock market's latest news, you can follow our Twitter account. We post multiple times daily about the biggest changes and catalysts in the market, so click the follow button if you don't want to miss the newest market updates. Now, back to today's video.
You know, we're also going into day 3 of the RNC. A lot of people are talking about the quote-unquote Trump trade. How much of this rotation into other names do you think is part of that Trump trade? How much of it is just many portfolio managers are over-positioned when it comes to tech?
Well, it's hard because you were left behind. If you didn't own Index Weight Plus, it was very hard to beat the S&P 500, which is the main benchmark. So I think you're overweight. I think you could see some profit taking, but I think a lot of investors and a lot of portfolio managers are going to look at the tech trade and say, look, this is where we see growth coming from, and we still think it's above market growth, and we want to hold these names. As for the Trump trade, I mean, you've seen a lot of that get priced in the last week. I think the big one's going to be tariffs in China. Obviously, J.D. Vance has some pretty strong opinions on China, and so for us, that's what we're looking at, who's exposed to Chinese revenue. I think we still would support Taiwan. You know, some of this stuff, you got to realize it's an election year and that you're going to hear a lot of crazy things between now and November. And I strongly do not think you should position your portfolio at things you hear during campaigning, because that's often not what turns out to be what happens after November.
Nvidia, ASML, and TSMC all saw declines recently, and this came after it was reported that the Biden administration was considering a wide-sweeping crackdown to clamp down on companies exporting their chip-making equipment to China. Not only that, but comments from former President Trump added further negative sentiment to semiconductor stocks, as he said in an interview that Taiwan should pay the U.S. for defense, and added that Taiwan took about 100% of America's semiconductor business. These remarks have led many chip stocks investors to think that if Trump becomes president, he won't be fully committed to defending Taiwan in the event of an attack by China, which sees Taiwan as part of its territory. And so, chip companies, many of which are either based in Taiwan or depend on the country for supply, saw their shares plummeting. But this isn't too surprising, especially when you consider how important Taiwan is to the entire market. In fact, Taiwan remains a global force in the semiconductor industry, leading with a staggering 68% market share, and it's also home to a majority of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips. It's easy to see why Trump's comments are not good for Nvidia, as the company's main supplier, TSMC, is based in Taiwan, and Nvidia's dependence on TSMC is a very serious issue that analysts and investors always talk about. In fact, just last year, Nvidia paid the chipmaker $7.73 billion for its services, accounting for 11% of TSMC's revenue, according to financial analyst Dan Nestet. So, should Nvidia stock investors be worried? Let's find out. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Investocracy.
Exports have already been restricted, so what's the focus now?
Well, the focus could end up being on any and all equipment from major chip making or chip equipment providers. As you say, yes, those restrictions, they're already in place. So at the end of last year, for instance, we saw major players like Tokyo Electron, you can see that big slump there, ASML in the Netherlands as well, essentially restricted from selling some of the most advanced technology to China. What hasn't happened, though, is the servicing or the maintenance, because the likes of Tokyo Electron, ASML, they've continued to maintain the equipment that Chinese companies already own. And the importance of that really just can't be understated, because if you don't service chip equipment, then it can actually stop working within a few months, definitely within a year. And so that's an issue for the US, because if you've got those companies like Tokyo Electron, like ASML, that keep maintaining their machines, then essentially you're continuing to enable China with its chip-making ambitions.
All right, so with that in mind, how could the US go about doing this?
What they could impose is a measure called the Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDPR. It's essentially a rule that puts in place restrictions or controls on foreign-made products that use even just the tiniest amount of American technology, which is why I said basically any and all of equipment could be targeted by the FDPR. What sources are telling us is that this sort of idea or plan is being touted or discussed with officials in Tokyo, The Hague, if Japan and the Netherlands don't tighten their own measures on China. The US, of course, in a very tricky position, though, because there's also that question of how much are allies going to be listening here when you've got the US presidential election just a few months away.
There are many dangers to doing business in Taiwan. Even if you put the geopolitical tensions aside, Taiwan is in a region that's prone to a lot of natural disasters like earthquakes, and one even happened earlier in the year that forced TSMC to pause its manufacturing for one day. But Nvidia's CEO, Jensen Huang, feels perfectly safe relying on Taiwan. Last year, he said that he had many discussions with Nvidia's Taiwanese suppliers, which made him feel very safe. He also reassured investors and reporters, saying that Nvidia was diversified through multiple fabs at TSMC and confirmed that Nvidia plans to source from the TSMC fab in Arizona, which will start production in the first half of 2025. So Nvidia has a lot of diversity and resilience designed into its supply chain, and investors who've been following the company for a long time would know that Nvidia is exerting a lot of efforts to diversify its supply chain. For instance, the company has turned to companies like Intel and Samsung for chip packaging, and this could help it reduce its reliance on TSMC. And you could even say that Nvidia has a lot more reasons to diversify than geopolitics. TSMC said last year that demand for its chip-on-wafer-on-substrate has exceeded its production capacity and vowed to double capacity by the end of 2024. This means that if Nvidia wants to meet the insane demand for its chips, then it needs to find more suppliers, and the company definitely recognizes this. To sum up, we can't deny that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would definitely harm Nvidia, but the company is doing everything it can to prepare for such a situation, if it ever happens. And with this in mind, let's get into the positives surrounding Nvidia and why investors should ignore the current volatility. But first, if you made it this far into the video, thank you. These videos take a lot of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed them, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This goes a long way in helping us grow. That said, back to the video.
For years, we've been talking about the concentration, I think, of power and production manufacturing of the world's most advanced chips in Taiwan, particularly from one company, that's TSMC, which accounts for a huge proportion of the most advanced chips in the world. Now, these comments from, I think, President Trump you're alluding to are interesting. There's two things I want to pick up on. He says in his comments in that Bloomberg Businessweek interview, they took 100% of our chip business. Now, what he's referring to is a trend over the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years where America is once very, very advanced in the manufacturing of chips. But then a certain trend occurred, which was what they call this fabless model, where American companies were designing chips, but manufacturing is difficult. And you saw Taiwan in particular begin to pick up the manufacturing. So if you're a company, you design a chip, you don't have to manufacture it yourself. You can outsource that, contract that to TSMC. And that's how TSMC and some of the other Taiwanese chip firms became so big. But it's also the reason why American tech companies have thrived. An Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft would not be able to do what they do without TSMC. And imagine these companies now had to invest billions and billions of dollars in advanced manufacturing of equipment. You imagine these margins we look at from Apple and some of these other companies, they just wouldn't exist. And so there are two parts, I think, to when President or former President Trump says that the chip manufacturing has moved out of the States. Yes, it has done, but it's exactly that trend that has allowed so many of what are the world's largest firms now American firms to thrive and be cutting edge.
Despite the recent Nvidia pullbacks, analysts are predicting that the company will consolidate before rising again, and we think that the company's Q2 financial results on the 28th of August could move the share price higher. Each day seems to bring a new analyst upgrade for Nvidia stock, and these analysts highlight the ongoing demand for the company's microchips and processors that drive AI applications and models. But beyond the company's AI chips and processors, analysts say Nvidia is likely to also gain from growing sales of its AI servers. And what has Wall Street so bullish is not only the soaring demand for Nvidia's chips, but also the speed at which the company is advancing its technology and announcing new products. In June, Nvidia unveiled its next generation of AI chips named Rubin, which arrive after the company previously announced its Blackwell line of microchips in March of this year. The company said that it plans to release new AI chips every year rather than every 2 years, as was previously the case, and this will definitely help it maintain its leadership position in the AI chips market. There were a lot of milestones for Nvidia in this year's first half. Not only did the company's share price more than double, but Nvidia achieved a $3 trillion market capitalization and split its stock on a 10-for-1 basis. So, after so many momentous events, it's not surprising that the stock has taken a breather. But it likely won't be long before the stock is breaking out again, as the company's upcoming Q2 earnings report could be the catalyst that will send the stock higher. But, what do you think about Nvidia stock? Is it a buy at the current price? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to tell us what your valuation for Nvidia is. If you would like to know what companies like Nvidia have been up to these past few days, go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. See you there.